Tuesday, Portable channel, you know what it means. A brand new tutorial. And this time we're covering a topic you've been asking about a lot, cameras. In this complete tutorial, we will dive into everything you need to know about working with cameras in Blender. How to manage them, animate them, switch between one or multiple cameras, useful shortcuts, camera settings like depth of field, and plenty of other tips along the way. So let's jump right in. So today guys, as I said, let's talk about cameras in Blender. How to create them, manage them, and animate them. We are going to use this beautiful jellyfish, which is new and based on the latest short the Blender Studio made. So I'm really happy to have this kind of assets and to use them today for this tutorial. So let's dive in with this jellyfish, and first, let's go over how to create and manage cameras. So to create a camera, that's pretty simple. You can pick a camera through the Add menu here, or if you press Shift plus A, you will find the camera object just there. So let's select it, and by default you will see a camera appear in the scene collection. And if I press the numpad key period, it will focus on my camera. As you can see, it spawns by default at the location of your cursor, just like any object you create from the Add menu. So we are going to use how to manage that, move around the camera and place it where we want. Of course, by default you can simply select the camera and press G to move it, R to rotate it, or use the gizmo that you can enable from the menu here, translation, rotation, scale, or everything combined, and move it around as well. Sometimes that's enough to position your camera, but most of the time you will want to use shortcuts. So let me show you that. So let's go back a bit and say I want my camera to be placed somewhere here. Instead of grabbing your camera and placing it manually by hand, you can just use Ctrl plus Alt plus 0. This will automatically snap your camera to your current view, bring it where you are looking, and switch you directly into the camera view. And before jumping into camera properties, there is something important to understand. If you now move around, you will notice that as soon as I rotate or navigate, I can easily exit the camera view. That's one of the first things you will encounter when working with cameras in Blender. You get the camera point view, but you're not really locked into it by default. So to get back to the camera view, you can either click this icon or press 0 on your numpad. And if you are on a laptop, of course, you can go into Preference and K-Map to adjust all the shortcuts I'm mentioning here. Now to control the camera while moving around without constantly exiting the view, you can use this lock icon here. This will lock the camera to your view navigation and prevent you from leaving the camera frame when you move around. So now I can move through my scene with the camera, just like I'm actually holding it on my shoulder and navigating through the environment. And if you notice, now when I move around, you can see the transform is being updated live. That means I'm actually moving the camera object while I'm navigating. Because if I'm not locking the camera and I move around, there is no transform updating at all. Which means that I'm just moving through the scene using the default viewport's point of view. And right away, when I go back here, turn the lock on and press 0, you can start to see some clipping happening on the model. As you saw at the beginning, this model is quite large. If I select it, you can see it's around 156 meters high, which is quite big. So the camera has a bit of trouble capturing everything properly because by default the settings are designed more for human scale objects. So we need to adjust that, and this is the perfect moment to dive into the camera object settings. If you select the camera, everything is available here. So let's go in and break down what's going on and quickly fix this clipping issue. So let's right away fix the clipping issue we have here, and it's all located under the clip start and end values. If you are too close to an object and you start seeing clipping, that's where clip start comes into play. But in our case, it's the clip end values we want to adjust, because we are far away from the model and we are seeing clipping at a distance. So we can simply increase this value to something like 100,000 and then we are good. It's the same thing in the viewport point of view. If I exit the camera here and focus on that, you can see I also start to get clipping in the background. And you can adjust these values directly for the viewport as well. Keep in mind that when you are moving around in the viewport, it's a bit like controlling a virtual camera. So these clipping settings matter there too if you want a deeper viewing range. Now, back to our actual camera. Another thing you will probably want to adjust is the aspect ratio. Here, it's fine because we are dealing with a tall, vertical model, but let's say we want to change it. This isn't controlled in the camera settings, but in the output settings. Here we have the resolution X and Y, and as you can see, it's currently vertical because X is smaller than Y. If I invert those values, I get the more standard horizontal framing. And another useful trick here, if you want to get a better sense of your framing or see more of your scene while rocking, is to temporarily unlock the camera, zoom out using the middle mouse wheel, and then lock it again. That gives you a wider rocking view to understand composition and framing more easily. It's a bit of a workflow trick, but it's important to know because these are the core things you will constantly deal with when working with camera in Blender. Alright, let's say I'm going to place myself here and go back to the settings. So apart from clip start and end, we also have the type. This is quite an important one. The main choice here is between perspective or orthographic, so no perspective distortion at all. And we also have panoramic as well as custom, where you can fully modify the projection settings. Then we have the focal length, which you can adjust in millimeters or switch to field of view in degrees. Be careful les amis. The lower the value, the wider the angle and the more wide shoot look you will get. And the higher the value, the more compressed and zoomed in the image becomes. It's kind of a closer to a portrait shoot with a stronger depth of field effect in the end. So it really depends on the shot you want to achieve. So for now, let's leave at default. You also have Shift X and Y. This can be a bit tricky to understand at first, but if you look at the transform values while I'm adjusting X and Y shifts, you can see I'm moving the camera framing without actually affecting the transform location. I'm essentially shifting the camera view, offsetting the framing without changing its actual position of the scene. And the best way to understand this is to go out of the camera view, press 0 and focus on it. Now, it becomes much clearer what's happening. It's like you are holding a camera and sighting moving your shoulder or hips to reframe the shot without moving your feet. Just below that, we have the sensor fit and the sensor size. This is a bit more advanced, but what you can do here is use the predefined presets to match real-world camera setting. It's quite specific, but it can be really useful if you want to match a particular cinematic or photographic style. Then we have a safe areas. If I enable this, you can see additional guidelines appear. As the name suggests, safe areas helps define framing margins to make sure important elements are not too close to the edges of the frame. This is often used in film and animation to ensure everything stays properly centered, especially when working with different aspect ratios. So let's turn that off for now. We also have a background image where you can add a reference image directly in the camera view if needed. Then comes the viewport display, which is very useful. The first thing you will notice is Passepartout, which is already enabled here. Passepartout is a darknet area outside of the camera frame. If I disable it, everything comes uniform, but it can be harder to visually read your framing. So most of the time, I want to keep it enabled. You also have the size control here, which is quite handy. If I go outside the camera, you can see the camera icon is quite small. If I increase the size value, the camera icon becomes bigger and easier to see in a large scene like this. Then we have limits, which are also very useful. It helps you visualize and better understand your camera clipping and framing. If I go out of the camera view and adjust these settings, you can see it draws debug lines based on the clip start and clip end values. So if I move clip start, you will see the near clipping range updating. And if I adjust clip end, the far clipping visualization also updates. This is really helpful for understanding where your camera will start and stop rendering geometry. It can even help you align your shot more precisely. On top of that, it also shows focus information related to depth of field. If I adjust the focus distance, you can see the focus marker moving as well. So in one place, you get a full visual debug of what your camera is actually doing. Before jumping into depth of field, there are a few more display options. For example, you can enable mist if you're working with fog, for example, or atmospheric depths and want to debug distance visually. You can also display sensor and name. If I enable sensor, you will see additional framing guides appear. And if I enable name, the camera name becomes visible and the viewport, which is useful when working with multiple cameras. And finally, we have composition guides, which are extremely helpful for framing. Instead of relying only on clipping or sensor overlays, you can enable guides like third, center, diagonals, golden ratio, and more. This helps you compose your shots properly and maintain good framing rules. You can even change the gauge color if needed. So overall, this gives you a lot of control over how you analyze and refine your camera setup. And from here, we can now move on to depth of field. So let's talk about depth of field. The main thing to understand right from the start is that depth of field works based on two key settings: the focus distance and the aperture. The focus distance, whether you set it manually or based on an object, is basically where you place your point of focus in the scene. That's the area that will stay sharp. And depending on your focal length, as well as your f-stop value, you can increase or decrease the blur effects coming from your camera. So the lower your f-stop's value is, and the higher your focal length is, the stronger the blur effects will be. Here, we are working with a very large scene and a big model, so we sometimes need to push the value a bit further than real-world settings. In 3D, we can afford to cheat a bit to get the desired visual results. What you're seeing here is based on a very standard camera behavior, almost like a real-world photography values. But because we are in 3D, we can push things further to control the final look. To really see what's happening, we need to switch to render mode. Now I can either manually adjust the focus distance or pick an object to drive it. To quickly demonstrate, I'm going to set a very low focus distance value, and I will also lower the f-stop value. And right away, you can start to see the depth of field effect appearing in the scene. Now, instead of using a manual distance, if I pick an object here, the camera will automatically adjust the focus based on that object. You can see how the depth of field updates accordingly. As you can see, because it's such a large scene, the backgrounds can sometimes be harder to fully blur out properly. In that case, having a more distant object behind the subject can help improve the effect. But again, you can push the value quite far to exaggerate the look, so now you can really see the background starting to blur. I wouldn't recommend going too extreme in the settings though, because it can introduce visual artifacts in the render. This is mainly just to demonstrate how it works. In more standard scene, without such a large environment or scale, you will see the effects much more naturally and quickly just by adjusting focus distance and f-stop. So now let's bring everything back to more reasonable values and adjust it directly on the mesh, maybe something like this for you. This subject is really the main settings you will be working when it comes to controlling depth of field in Blender. And just to mention the other parameters, if I lower this value again, the blur you are seeing is actually called bokeh in technical terms. And the bokeh can be adjusted using these additional settings, which basically gives you control over the shapes and character of the blur itself. So instead of just having a standard smooth blur, you can start to influence how that blur behaves and how it looks in the background, which can really help to push the cinematic quality of your shots. So let's go back to another value, and let's say I want to focus on that area and create a shot here just to show you another example on how to adjust the blur. If I go back into render mode and now I select the camera, I can manually adjust the values here. So if I put it to 1, you can already see the blur becoming much more visible. I will try to zoom in here. As I increase the values and lower the aperture, you don't necessarily need to extreme values, but you can already start to see the blur effect appearing in both the foreground and the background. What I recommend to really understand what's going on is to go back to the camera settings and use viewport display, especially the limits option. This helps you properly visualize and place your focus distance if you want a more manual approach. So let's say I want to focus on this first strand here. I can adjust the focus distance and place it exactly here, so I know the focus point is going to be at that position. Now, if I go back to the camera view, you can even turn off the limits if needed, just to have a cleaner view and better understand where your focus point is. From there, you can start fine-tuning the effects, lowering the f-stop slightly to exaggerate the depth of field and really see where the focus is sitting. And here, I can clearly see I've locked in a good focus point. Then I go back again and fine-tune the f-stop value and overall settings. You want to stay subtle with it, but if you also adjust the focal length, as I mentioned earlier, you can get even more control and much more cinematic results. And here, another example. I've duplicated this object here, and I'm still using a focal length of 50 mm. What I've done is simply adjust the focus distance manually, and I've set a very low f-stop value. Again, because of the scale of this scene, this is a bit extreme, so try to avoid pushing it too far like this in production. But it's a good way to first experiment, place your focus, and really understand where your focus point is. Then you can refine everything afterwards. And now, if I go back to render mode with these settings, you can see the focus is clearly on the first jellyfish, while the second one becomes nicely blurred in the background. So you can really test different setups and see how depth of field reacts. This is a good example of how, in a large scene, it can be a bit trickier to manage and fine-tune all these settings properly. But remember this key point. Depth of field is driven by two main things, the focus distance and the f-stop value. So before jumping into animation, let's say you have multiple cameras. How do you actually manage that? This is a specific use case you will definitely run into at some point. Because right now, if I create a new camera and press 0, it will still control the original camera we had. That's because this is that we call the active camera. So let me go back here, exit the camera view, and first create a new camera with Shift plus A, then camera. As remember, by default, it creates the camera at the cursor location. So now, if I use Ctrl plus Alt plus 0 to snap the camera to my current view, it will actually move the first camera recreated, not the new one. And that's not what we want. So what we need to do is to make sure we understand which camera is active. There is a shortcut for that, but first, as you can see in my outliner, I don't have the active camera indicator icon visible. Normally, you should see a small camera icon that shows which one is currently active. If you don't see it, it's because of the filter setting. So go into the filter tab here and enable object contents. Now you will see the active camera icon appear. This is really simple but very important indicator to understand what the current active camera is. So now, if I click on the second camera and redo my Ctrl plus Alt plus 0 shortcut, you will see it correctly affect the second camera instead of the first one. So you can switch context like this and define a new active camera through these icons. And if you want a shortcut approach, if I select the first camera and press Ctrl plus 0, it will directly set it as the active camera. And now you can see the icon is now highlighted on that camera. So this is how to manage multiple cameras in Blender and control which one is active in your scene. Alright, now let's talk about animation. We can cover three main types of animation in Blender. The first one is the most basic, just using transform keyframes. The second one could be a turntable. If you want to present an object or create a simple 360 degrees camera move. And the third one is using a path with curve-based animation. So let's take our newly created camera and say we want to animate it. First, let's adjust the clipping a bit, like we did earlier. I will set it up roughly like this. Now, let's say I want to do a traveling shot from here up to here. What I can do is position myself at a starting point, let's say around here. You can use a dub sheet or just the timeline. I personally find it's easier to start with the timeline, but it's really up to you. And as you can see, we already have some animation in the scene, which is really nice. Yes, it's quite slow, because again, this is a very large scene, so I will speed things up by scrubbing through, but of course you can just press play. So let me place myself here. Now we have multiple ways to create a keyframe. You can go into the item panel and right-click a transform value to insert a keyframe, or you can use the shortcut I'm using here. With a mouse over the viewport, you can press I to create a keyframe on all transforms. You can also target specific channels by right-clicking directly on a value if you want more control. So the first step is always the same, set your first keyframe. Then I move forward in time and adjust the camera position. Let's say I want it higher on the Z axis. I will increase the value here. And then I press I again to set another keyframe. And just like that, I've animated the camera. If I go back and play, you can see the camera is now traveling through the scene. Now you'll notice the motion is smooth, it starts slow, speeds up, and slows down again at the end. That's because by default Blender uses easing between the keyframes, so you get this natural acceleration and deceleration. We will go deeper into interpolation later with another example. Another option is auto keying. If I enable auto key, then any transform I do will automatically create keyframes without me needing to press anything. So if I move or rotate the camera, for example on the x-axis, it will automatically insert keyframes, as you can see here. Auto-keying is really powerful when you are animating quickly. It can also be risky if you move things by mistake, because everything gets keyed automatically. So make sure to use it carefully. Now I will just delete these keys for now. And that's our first simple camera animation. Alright, now let's create another animation example. And just a quick tip. At any moment, if you want to go back to the camera settings, instead of going through the outliner, you can simply click on the viewport overlay icon here. It will automatically select the camera for you and bring you back to its settings. This is really useful when you're working with a long or complex hierarchy in the outliner. Okay, now let's cover the scenario where you want to do a turntable. I'm just going to quickly increase the size of my camera, like I did earlier, so I can clearly see where everything is. We can also rename the camera. So this one will be called something like camera linear up. Now let's create another one. So remember, this new one here will be your camera turntable. I will make sure to set it as active by clicking here. And I'm going to place it somewhere around here. Then I press Ctrl plus Alt plus 0 to snap it to my current view. After that, I will adjust a few settings. Let's say I want something a bit wider, so I will set the focal length around 30 mm. And I will also tweak the clipping and value a bit. So now, how do we quickly and effectively create a turntable? The best way is to create an empty. Parent the camera to that empty, and then animate a full 360 degrees rotation on the controller. So now I'm going to show you here, and you will see how fast and simple it is. So I'll go back to my camera. Again, I will quickly increase its display size so I can clearly see it. Now I'm going to create an empty object here. Of course, you can choose any types you want, but it often makes sense to pick a simple plain axis or cube and adjust its display size in the viewport so it's visible. Then I will move the empty into position using G and constrain it to the Z axis, placing it roughly in the center of the scene. Of course, ideally, you would place it exactly at the center of your model or use the object origin, but for now, a manual placement is completely fine. Next step, I select my camera, then Shift select the empty and press Ctrl plus P to parent it, choosing Objects. Now the camera is constrained by the empty, meaning if I move or rotate the empty, the camera flows perfectly. That's exactly what I want. Also, if your outliner looks different, that's just a filter setting. Make sure object hierarchy is displayed in enabled so you can clearly see the parenting relationship. By default in Blender, the child object appears inside the parent in the hierarchy, which makes everything much clearer. Now it's really simple. I go to frame 0, select the empty, and I insert a keyframe on rotation. Then I move to, let's say, frame 250, and on the Z rotation, I select the full 360 degree turn, and I insert another keyframe. And now you already have a turntable. If you want it the other way around, just set it to minus 360 degrees instead. Now, if I play the animation, you can see the camera orbiting smoothly around the object, creating a clean turntable. You can still adjust the camera offset independently if you want to refine the framing while keeping animation intact. One last important thing, as you may have noticed, there is a slight ease in and ease out at the beginning and end. That's because of the interpolation. If you want a constant speed turntable, just select the keyframe, right-click and change the interpolation mode to linear. By default, Blender uses Bezier interpolation, which gives that smooth acceleration and deceleration. But for turntables, linear is often more appropriate. And that's it! You've got a proper turntable setup. Alright, and now the last part, animation based on a path or a curve. So let me go outside of the camera view. First, I'm going to create a curve or a path. If I press Shift plus A, you can go into the curve menu and choose either a basic curve or a path. That's completely up to you. I will just start with a simple default curve here. Now I can place it roughly around the scene. Of course, it's quite too small at first, so I will adjust the scale and make it bigger so it fits the environment better. Let's say something like this. I will just start shaping it, scaling it up, and positioning it properly in the scene. And what could be really interesting here is to create a path that goes between the legs of our jellyfish. You can really design any motion you want depending on your shots. It can go around objects, between elements, or follow a very stylized route. So I will continue shaping here, adjusting the curve and refining the path. And what's great about using a curve is that you can easily adjust the motion afterwards, without having to manually key every single pose. It's basically like a motion trail that you can refine at any time. I've got this first motion path set up. Next, I will create a new camera, same as before, with Shift plus A. I will make it active and name it Camera Curve. I will increase the camera display size so I can clearly see it, and set the focal length around 30 mm. Now, be ready, it comes to the important parts. Instead of keyframing manually, I'm going to constrain and parallel the camera to the curve, so that camera flows the path automatically. So let me show you now how to do that. So you want to select the camera and go to the Object Constraint panel here. As you can see here, I've let the camera at the default origin, so there are no location values applied. That's actually important to keep in mind. Now let's add a constraint, and what we're going to use is a follow path constraint. So we add a new object constraint and choose follow path, and now we just need to pick a target, which is our Bezier curve. And just like that, you can see the camera is now constrained to the curve. From here, if I play with the offset, the camera will start following the path along the curve. You can also go further and tweak options like forward or up axis, which affect the orientation of the camera along the path. But in most cases, it's better to leave those at default unless you specifically need to create direction issues. Then you also have settings like fixed position. If you enable this, you won't go the raw curve parameters anymore. Instead, you get a normalized value going from 0 to 1. So instead of dealing with arbitrary curve values, you know that 0.5 is exactly the midpoint of the path. That can be really useful when animating precisely. Now, a curve-based setup is not only about moving an object along the path, it's also influenced by the curve's shape, including its radius variations, which mean it can behave slightly different than a simple linear motion. There are also options like follow curve or a tilt-based orientation. If you pay attention to this camera rotation, you will see it can automatically align and twist along the curve based on its direction and tilt. In our case, we don't really want too much automatic rotation or tilt behavior, so we usually keep things fairly simple and controlled. So the basic setup is target the correct curve, enable fixed position for cleaner control, and that's already enough for most camera animation along the path. But of course, there is one more important step. Before adding these constraints, we might also want to control what the camera is looking at. So we can lock the focus into a specific subject while still following the curve motion. And for that, we are going to use another constraint. So still on the camera, I'm going to add another constraint modifier, and this time I'm going to use a track to constraint. And this one is pretty simple, because I just need to pick the target I want the camera to look at. So it could be the object itself, for example the jellyfish, but in that case, since the origin is at the bottom, the camera will naturally point towards the origin of the mesh. That's why, in most cases, it's better to use separate objects instead. So instead of targeting the geometry directly, I'm going to use this empty as my target. And now you can see the camera is always pointing at the empty. If I play with the offset factor, it will keep tracking the target while also introducing a nice variation in the motion, almost like a subtle rolling adjustment, which can look quite nice. So if I go back to my camera view and start adjusting the offset, you can see we get a smooth traveling motion combined with a stable focus point. And that is really powerful for cinematic shots. This is how you can combine a curve-based animation with a camera that is both moving along a path and constantly tracking a subject, all using constraints. What's important thing here to keep in mind is generally better to start with the camera at location 000. Otherwise, constraint can behave in unexpected ways. So you can simply clear the location, make sure everything is aligned to the origin, and build your setup from there. Afterwards, you can always add offsets, for example, if needed, but it's best to start from a clean base. And that's really the core of it. This is how you handle more complex camera setup in Blender, combining multiple cameras, animation, and constraint-based workflows. And thank you for all support on the channel, guys! The channel is only 2 months old, which is honestly amazing. Sure, the channel is not as old as the Unreal channel, but we've already built an amazing community here, so that's really cool. Thanks again for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't hesitate to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I see you in 2 weeks for a new one. Ciao!